Hi there, and good morning, everyone who's in the Southern Hemisphere, to those of you joining us from the North. Good afternoon, or whatever time of day this finds you. And for those watching the playback, it's lovely to see you too. My name's Laura Bell, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to a SafeStack Masterclass. Now, these are events that we hold fairly frequently to share some of the things we've learned along the way. And today we're going to be talking specifically to those involved in high growth organizations. Now, let me just do a bit of housekeeping. You can chat at any point and ask your questions in the chat box at the side. I'm just going to practice saying hi to you there now. Please feel free to make yourself at home, maybe even introduce yourself. If you wish to ask a question at any point, please feel free to use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen, and that will show up on my screen. We'll get to those at the appropriate time in our conversation. And like all good masterclasses, it wouldn't be the same without questions. So the more you share, the more that you ask, the more you'll get from this. Now, um, let's get started. Just bear with me a moment. I'm just going to get that. There we are. Right. So a little bit about me before we begin. So my name is Laura Bell. I'm the founder and CEO of SafeStack Academy, but I'm also an expert in the cybersecurity field. I've been doing this a long time, almost 20 years. I'm the co-author of Agile Application Security, published by O'Reilly, and Security for Everyone, soon to be published by Holloway. And you know what makes this class one of my favorites is I've spent most of my career helping high growth companies do security without getting in the way. And so it's an absolute delight to share not just what I've learned that works, but also what doesn't work and what you might want to avoid. So, what are we going to cover in today's session? We've got a lot to cover. I'm going to go at a fair pace, but I really encourage you to kind of come back to this afterwards. Both the slides and what I'm saying are all useful and applicable straight away. It's not just theory, this is what we can go and practice. So, we're going to have a look at why security matters, but don't worry, we're not going to go too deep. We're going to give you the playbook for minimum viable security. So the security essentials you want to be seeing in high growth companies. And then, as an investor, as somebody involved in high growth companies, how you can support them. So let's start off why security matters. Now, depending on how much you've been exposed to cybersecurity before, will depend on whether the diagram that's on the left of your screen right now is familiar. So we call it in security CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's the three things we try and preserve when we're protecting systems. But really, what we're talking about here isn't three words that need definition. It's how do we maintain the trust of our employees, trust of our customers? How do we protect what matters most? And what matters most is different for different organizations. And how do we remain open for business? Because at the end of the day, if security gets in the way of our ability to trade and to do what we do best in the world, then it doesn't matter that we're secure because we're not going to be a business for much longer. So in this talk, while we are respectful and our foundations are these traditional aspects of security, what we're focused on is a more pragmatic and practical application of that. Now, early stage security is a bit different to security in a big established company. So if you've worked in a large company before, so thousands of people, you've got many teams, maybe it's a brand people would recognize, then you're probably used to security being something that is managed by another team. High growth companies, however, often don't have a team. In fact, sometimes they don't even have a person. The average security team size in early stage companies is 1.2 people. And that's an average, which means there's a lot of companies out there who have nobody at all. We're used to our large established companies having a bigger budget. And we'll come back to that later when we talk about spend. In an established company, you have a reputation, and reputation is powerful in security. One of the reasons we trust each other is because of reputation. The idea that I've seen you do something good before, and therefore you will do it again. When you are a less established company, you don't have that reputation, and so people are more skeptical. You will be held, ironically, to a higher standard of security because you're unknown than if you were known. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate into any facts or truth, but it is worth a saying. The biggest difference, though, is how risk works. So, in a large established company, risk processes are well embedded. They've grown over time and they go from the board level down. But in a high growth company, risk is something different entirely. I mean, it's not that cybersecurity isn't a big risk to a young company, but in a young or high growth company, cybersecurity isn't the biggest monster. It's not the thing that's going to kill you first. And that's a significant difference. In a large organization, you're going to give cybersecurity a much higher focus if you know it's going to damage that reputation, damage that trust. But in a younger company, actually, what else matters? Well, as you'll know, as investors, as stakeholders in high growth companies, here's some examples of the types of things that you're going to have pain with before cybersecurity. Now, I'm a cybersecurity person telling you that my domain isn't going to be the worst thing for you. And I know that there's some irony in that. But it's important to realize because if we know that cybersecurity isn't the most important thing to a young company, but it has to be balanced in this mix of other risks, then we can give it that sort of respect. We can find a way to put it in with our existing risks rather than treating it as a separate thing entirely. So, how do we reframe this then from cybersecurity being something that has to be dealt with on its own, that has to be big and cumbersome and takes an entire enterprise, to doing it at a small, high growth company? Well, the first thing we need to remember is that security is an enabler for global growth. I'm based in New Zealand. We are a tiny, tiny company in the middle of nowhere, but we sell globally. And many of your portfolio companies will either be doing the same or aim to do the same. Now, if this is the case, then you're going to be wanting to make this process as simple as possible. And security can make that happen. Now, one of the reasons it makes this happen is because when you sell to another country or sell to a larger organization, they have to assess you. We call this due diligence. The idea that they are going to assess your security posture and decide whether you pose a threat to the organization or not. Now, as investors, as stakeholders, you're used to this. You do due diligence already as part of your investment regime. However, for many companies, and particularly for those roles outside of the executive who may not have dealt with due diligence before, this is a whole new game. It's also a level of due diligence and detail that hasn't really been covered until this stage of a company's life. So, what's this looking at? It's looking at, well, how do you handle risk? How do you measure it? How do you respond to it? What controls do you have in place? And the more prepared we can be for security, the quicker the due diligence goes, the more confidence we can give our customers, and the more we can understand how our customer thinks about risk. And remember that in a high growth company, it's not just that your risk, it's the risk you pose to others. So understanding your customer's appetite for risk can help you to meet them in the middle, to help you understand and anticipate their needs. Conversely to what popular belief seems to think that security also makes things more complicated and more expensive. Done well in a high growth company, security can actually increase focus and simplify design. Now, we'll dig into this a little bit later, but the idea is that if you accept and say that in a high growth company that security is a priority when we design, it takes ambiguity away. You don't say, well, okay, shall we do this now or shall we do this later? Because there's a policy, there's a decision has already been made. You just will choose design options in your user experience or in your onboarding flows or in your sales flows that make things simpler and less ambiguous, because simple is easy to navigate and much easier to stay safe in. And finally, and most importantly, because after all, a high growth company is surrounded by risk all of the time. And one of the things we want as investors is to reduce the risk of the organization and therefore tacitly increase its value. Embracing security is about reducing risk. It teaches us to fail fast, a concept that is overly familiar with anyone in high growth, but more importantly, it teaches us to recover quickly. It teaches us that there are bad things that will happen, and many of them are very likely, whether you are a big famous brand or not. But it teaches us that we need to be prepared, accept they're going to happen, respond and resume our activities as quickly as possible. And that increased resilience makes a stronger business overall. By applying the same mindset you would to security resilience to the rest of the organization, you end up with a very fast feedback loop and a very quick process for resuming when any difficulty occurs. So, let's get into the meat of it because that's why you're here, right? You want to know how minimum viable security or how security should work in high growth companies. And those might be your portfolio companies. It might be companies you're looking to invest in one day. And for those of you who've joined who are actually in those companies on the ground, for you, it might be a playbook of what you're going to be doing, maybe even today if I've done my job well. Now, don't be overwhelmed. There's a lot of boxes on this slide. What you're looking at here, is the traditional view of cybersecurity or information security. On the left-hand side, we have the tools we use. So policy, standards, people, process, and technology. These are essentially the high level or generic levers we can pull to make change. And on the right-hand side, we have our domains. So these are the areas of the business or of our operations where security has a direct impact. Now, these are directly linked to many compliance regimes. So things like ISO 27000 use similar terminology for theirs. So what do we take from this? Firstly, don't panic. We're not going to say today you need one of these for one of these and end up with 5 combinations of 12 things. I'm going to show you a slightly more simplified view. That doesn't mean this view is wrong. It just means that for where you're at in your age and stage, you need to be doing something a little bit more pragmatic and focused. Now, before I show you that, I want to talk about where we're aiming to get to, because it's not about just saying, I'm going to do security. Security isn't binary. It's not on or off. You can have maturity when it comes to security. You can be at the initial stages saying, we don't do this. And in fact, in some cases, I didn't even know we needed to do this. We can be repeatable, but a bit ad hoc. We do this in places. We've tried it, but we know we need work. We can be defined. We know what we're going to do, and we've even started to document it. And managed. Now, again, looking at how high growth companies work, we all start off at initial with everything we do, and we very rapidly migrate as far as we need to with maturity. And it's that need that's important. Not everything in a high growth company needs to be managed and scalable and at its peak effectiveness. You have to get to the level of maturity you need for the stage you're at. And that goes for security too. Each bit of security, you can set a target. I would like to be repeatable with this. But for this bit, I need to be really much more managed because it has this impact on the overall organizational strategy. So for every bit we're about to talk about, you're going to set a target of how mature do we need to be? That's not your end target. Maybe you'll mature onwards from there, but it's a starting point. So let's have a look at minimum viable security with our wobbly wave diagram. Now, there are 4 stages in minimum viable security. Step 1, survival. Now, bad things happen. Bad things happen all the time, whether you're crossing the road, drinking a cup of tea, or running a high growth company. There are bad things that are going to happen. Now, if we stop arguing about whether they will happen or won't and just accept they will, then planning for survival first is your absolute key skill. Because whatever happens next, you know you're going to be able to recover. Education comes next. You do not have the budget, time, or people to give this to a whole security team. So what you're going to do is you're going to recruit your internal team. That's okay. We do this all the time. That's why we all wear many hats. That's why our companies work in quite a rapidly evolving way as our roles definitions slide over time. Next, we're going to define. This is about understanding that maturity level that we're at right now, where we want to get to, and giving us some tools to communicate that. And then finally, implementation. Now, spoilers, a lot of people, a lot of organizations jump straight to step 4, to implementation. I'm probably a little bit unusual in my approach to security and high growth in that we don't do that first. I don't want you to spend a single penny. I want you to focus on the first 3 steps first because they are going to give you the plan, the team, and the instinct to survive. So what do these cover? Well, survival is about incident management and resilience. So incidents being things like ransomware, bad things are happening that might affect the ability to serve customers or might compromise your data or your accounts. Resilience is all of those things that aren't necessarily cybersecurity but will impact your business. So that's your earthquakes, natural disasters, and let's face it, pandemics. Education. That's our security culture and people, how we manage those, how we interact with them, and how we train. Now, I have a bias in that section, but I'm not here to sell to you today. So just remember, I'm talking in the general sense, not just about what I do. Now, definition, how we set up policy and risk. Now, some of you automatically shut off when I say policy. Please don't do that. Policy as I do it is not the same as you're used to, so I'll explain. and setting up roles and responsibilities. And then finally, implementation, which is important, but is much more than just technology. It's also about people, also about process. Now, you're going to see me just pausing from time to time. I'm just checking for those questions. So just remember, as we're going along, please do pop those questions in the bottom and I'll be happy to help you out. So let's get into it. How does this playbook work and what are you going to be looking for in your high growth company? So first one, step one, survival. Bad things are going to happen. Let's accept it and make sure we know how to respond. So for this stage, the objective in minimum viable security is to identify and plan for common security incidents and disruptions. Okay, that's a straightforward goal, and I want us to be very clear. In early stage security, we need these clear goals and objectives because they let us focus. And as we know, focus is how we win. If we're not focused, security can be overwhelming. It has 12 domains and 5 different tools we can apply. That's a lot of combinations. Now, based on this data here, this data is the last quarterly report from New Zealand's CERT. So that's our Computer Emergency Response. Your organizations will be in a different jurisdiction, and there may be equivalent reports you can find. But these are the statistics in the last 3 months of the most common attacks against businesses. Now, not just big businesses, not just small, but all businesses. Now, as you can see, if you were going to focus, you'd probably focus on the top 3 or 4 items. So our most common incidents, we want malware or ransomware. Phishing and credential harvesting, which leads to account compromise. Scams and fraud, and unauthorized access. Now, all of those combined, that's a lot of incidents for a very small country. And for you, each one of those would have a huge impact on the security of your systems and the operations of your company. So we're going to prepare to survive by making incident response plans for these 4 scenarios to start with. Now, we might expand this out over time, but for now, let's just focus on a few. Now, why we need to do this is because of how attacks happen. Now, our first priority in incident response and planning for survival is to know that something bad has happened. If you don't know something bad has happened, you can never fix it. Now, sadly, our statistics show us that for many organizations, it can take up to 180 days for your organization to know that something bad has happened at all. Now, that's a staggering amount of time in the life of an early stage high growth company. Half a year. I mean, that's literally made or broke companies in that period of time. We don't want to be in the position where we don't spot it for 80 days. We want to bring that identification as close to day one as we humanly can. And we do that by looking for the indications that something has gone wrong. That's creating visibility for those technical folk out there. That's your logging and monitoring. For those who are in the more human space, it's making sure that people are asking and double checking when strange things happen. Our second priority, once we've identified something bad is happening, is to plan for response. Now, even in a high growth organization, we want to make sure that we have a proper plan for this. Now, when I say proper, I'm English, and therefore I say proper in a way that you probably don't in the US. What I mean is that it is repeatable. It has a set of steps that are easy to understand that you can action with the team you have or the specialist you have on hand, that are aiming to identify, so find, verify, check if it's real, contain, stop it from spreading, and remediate or fix any incidents that happen. And this cycle happens on a loop. There are some amazing resources out there by companies like PagerDuty who go into incident response plans in much more detail. And in fact, you don't need to spend a penny. You can download incident response plans from their website and many others that will get you started. The common mistake made at this point is just winging it. Don't wing it. When you are in an incident situation, when something has gone wrong, and you'll know this from high growth companies, your cortisol and stress level rises. When your stress level rises, your decision making ability is compromised. Having a plan means you don't need to listen to your gut instinct. You can just follow the steps of the plan, which takes that emotional response out and makes you more effective. Our third and final priority in survival is getting back to resuming operations. Now, remember, if your company is only a year old, every day of outage is a big chunk of your time that you're not able to grow or to sell or to serve existing customers if you already have revenue in place. Now, resuming operations isn't just turning it back on, because turning it on back on a little bit too quickly has caused a lot of issue in the past for other organizations. It's about remediating, so fixing and making sure you have fixed it, communicating with all those people who need to know, and then monitoring to make sure there's no sign that something is still happening in the background that needs to be addressed. Resuming operations before you are ready and without all three parts of this can cause significant brand damage. Now, I don't mean in the global sense of brand, because if you're a high growth company, you may not be well known yet, or you might just be working on that brand recognition. But it could cause brand damage with your existing customers, the ones that you want to really keep, those first 100 you want to delight. And for those, that could lead to churn, and churn is a problem. So getting sorted to survive can, when faced with incidents, reduce churn. Step two, phase two of our minimum viable security is education. So in education, we're trying to create a culture of understanding of cybersecurity and promote shared responsibility for it. Now, this is where I have a bias. Please note the following section is done without any sales pitch or gimmicks, because I literally sell cybersecurity training to high growth companies, but so do many other people. So let's talk about at a high level what you need to be doing. So the first rule of doing our education phase and managing the security of people is to trust each other, but verify. It's perfectly okay. It's not outside the bounds to just double check things. We all know that hiring the wrong people in early stage is very expensive. It causes massive disruption to the business, and at worst case can lead to IP loss or compromise of systems. But it goes much further than that. When we trust each other implicitly without any verification, we're closing off that feedback loop that says, are we doing something right or are we doing something wrong? And by closing off that feedback loop, we're closing off our ability to learn and grow. So we want to be making sure that our decisions in people security allow us to check, learn, verify, and adapt, especially when it comes to hiring. Now, when it comes to the people management and growing culture, security fits into a number of places, but the basics, all you need to do just to get started are these. So, before you employ someone, do some background checks. Don't just ask your friend. Proper background checks don't cost a lot of money, but they can save you a lot of money later on in either recovering from an incident or finding out you hired the wrong person. Remember, your people are a reflection of your brand. So if you hire somebody who hasn't got the right background or can't pass those background checks, that could negatively impact on your brand and reputation over time too. So be very mindful. While they're employed with you, you want to be looking at how you onboard them. Bring in security from day one. When they change roles, we want to be reassessing, making sure that we are still doing security appropriately for that person. And then if they need access to new tools, we want to be checking, well, do they need this? How do we control it? And finally, when they offboard, making sure simple things are done, returning equipment, making sure computers are cleaned, making sure accounts are shut down. Some of the biggest causes of account compromise in high growth companies are forgetting to offboard somebody who leaves your organization. So if you have churning people, then offboarding is a superpower for keeping that risk low. Your next priority is to give them the skills to protect themselves. Now, however you do this, that is okay. You can sit in a room, you can teach this by hand. You can use free materials. Amazon, for example, gives away free security awareness training that is suited to some companies in some jurisdictions, particularly in the US. In high growth companies, our teams need to be taught resilience and independence. Now, in traditional security approaches, we teach them to go, hey, go talk to the security team, go talk to IT and they will help you. But if you don't have that team, if you don't have those people, you can't teach that. It's not appropriate. So you have to find a way to teach based on empowerment and action. So you're asking your people to not just spot bad things, but to take action themselves. The most important thing you need to remember as stakeholders in high growth companies, and this one, is that you are included in they. You are part of the team. So whether you're an advisor or a board member and you only see them once every couple of months, or whether you're actually sat on the executive team today, you need to take the training too. You need to model that behavior. Any gaps in that sends the message that this is not for everyone. And leadership has to start with modeling those behaviors yourself. So far, we have plans for survival. We've built an incident response plan, and there's some great free resources to help you do that. We have educated and created a people management culture that considers security in our access controls, our pre-onboarding, our post-employment, and gives people the skills and the focus to be empowered to make action and change themselves without relying on a team to do it for them. So let's look at stage 3, at definition. Definition is about setting direction. Now, for high growth companies, this should be something you do already. It's just a different flavor. Whether it's a go to market strategy or whether it's your overall growth plans or the plan you have for fundraising, you are already doing this. Setting direction for security is no different. That level of clarity on direction gives focus, sets clear expectations, and allows it to be measurable. And this is split into 2 areas: policy and risk, roles and responsibilities. The first thing you want to be doing is defining an owner for security. Now, that person, or it could be people, but one role typically will do it. And it's speaking from a generalized account, that might be a dedicated CISO, or more likely, it's probably someone like your CTO or VP engineering who is sharing responsibility for this. That person needs to have authority. You've got to give them the ability to make decisions and to be able to act without asking for further assistance. They need to have the ability. You've got to give them some skills and training. If they have never done security before, they can't implicitly know how to do this. Now, that's not something I do, but there are many, many resources out there for helping new security leaders into their roles. They need resources. Now, giving somebody an extra hat to wear doesn't mean they can get the job done if you don't give them the budget and the people and the team that they need to actually make a change. Now, remember with this, if you are one of those high growth companies where people are still wearing many, many hats, so your CTO is also the CFO, is also head of security, and sometimes also cleans the office, one day, not far from now, your person is going to be very rushed. And to try and take some of that pressure off, they'll take off one of those hats for a day and they'll forget to put it back on. So please remember, if you are putting this in place, it's a temporary thing until you can then give it to a more dedicated person. And the more hats a person wears, the more help they're going to need from you. Your next step for your definition phase is to assess your current maturity level. Now, there's a really key word in this, and that's your. This isn't a generalized thing. Every high growth company is different because they are a different group of people in a different market with a different set of experiences. This is about understanding 3 variables: your location, your maturity right now, the destination you're trying to get to, and the amount of time you want to take to get between your location and destination. You can't control where you are now. You are where you are now. That has already been done. But you can control how much time you want to spend and the destination you want to get to. So when you're assessing your maturity, assess using the framework we've provided earlier in this talk of initial through to mature, where you are now across your domains. And there's a group of tools free of charge that you can use to do this, such as the OWASP's ASVS and OWASP SAM, which are free to use maturity frameworks. I'll provide links to those afterwards in my following email. Use those frameworks to assess where you currently are and make a plan to where you want to get to over what period of time. Now, please note, you're not going to get this done by next Tuesday. You're not going to get to 100% secure, and you're never actually done with being secure. So try and set your expectations, your destination, in a realistic way that preserves this, that makes it okay to say, we're going to aim for enough security for where we're at now. And then over time, we're going to get further than that. Next, we're going to define our expectations. That's our 3rd priority. Now, these are the words that tend to terrify people and feel like we could be investing time in something that's not growing the business: policy and standards. We don't like documentation too much in early stage companies. I totally get it, because documentation isn't adding to our business. Documentation can sometimes just be a distraction. It can give us a sense of doing something without actually doing the action. In minimum viable security, we can embrace minimum viable documentation. A policy could be as simple as a side of A4 or letter if you're in the US. Excuse me a second. Whereas a standard can just be a wiki page or a piece of markdown in a GitHub repository. The important bit is not the huge size of the document, it's what you put in it. Your high-level policy is a high-level statement of intent that says, as a company, this is what we're going to do about security. And this is why security matters. And this is how we're going to measure it. Your policy doesn't change that often. Your standards are how you interpret your policy and how you're going to make it happen. So it's the criteria or expectations that you're going to measure your policy against. For example, we are going to have a policy that says we protect our customer data. Our standard would say how we're going to do this, for example, by encrypting it at rest or by never sharing it. Having documented policy and standards in any way that suits your communications and culture is a really clear guiding light for your team, because when they're coming to do the implementation bit, the bit we're coming to next, it means that they know, have I done enough? Have I met the standard? Am I able to focus? If you don't have these, you can end up spending a lot of money very quickly and not actually improving your security. For those of you who've been involved in early stage marketing and sales, it's the same deal. Without a go-to-market strategy and research, you spend a lot of money and you may not see that return. Our final stage of minimum viable security is arguably our biggest one. It's the implementation stage, but it's also the one made up of the smallest parts. Let me explain. The aim or objective of our implementation phase is to make small iterative changes to bring the company closer to its desired security target. So you are here, you want to get there. How do I get there? Now, you're not going to run a marathon in one day. You're going to do this in tiny, tiny changes. And to echo phrases you will have heard elsewhere, we're going to do it in non-scalable ways first, because we're going to try and make sure it's the right change, not necessarily the most elegant or sophisticated one. So here's my big warning to you, and I'm sure the investors in the room will be fairly happy with this. Please do not insert coin to continue. It's very easy to get suckered in these early stages of doing security to spending a lot of money. There are a lot of boxes out there that are sold that will solve your security concerns. One product will do all the things. And we all know that that's not true. That's what, if we sell products, we know that our products can't solve the whole world's problems. Neither can a security product, even if we want it to. Just like buying a gym membership doesn't make you fit, buying a security product doesn't make you secure. You need the technology in the right amount at the right time. You need the people who can operate it and interact with it. And you need the processes to mean that the results of these technologies are fed back into your systems to make sure you're getting value. So before you spend money on the technology, you need to think about how this is going to work end to end. When you're looking at implementation plans or options, whether it's putting in people, whether it's putting in a physical or manual or non-scalable process, or whether it's putting in a technology, you're looking for it to be measurable, respectful, and appropriate. And by this I mean, you need to know that it's actually helping. So going back to our definition, is it taking us towards our destination? It needs to be respectful. If it's going to take a lot of time and resource that your team don't currently have, if it's going to place undue burden, cause pain, frustration, confusion, it's not respecting the organization and what they're already doing. And so it's probably not the right tool for you. A process that slows you down and causes friction in a company that is very fast and high growth is not the right process. Now, please be very careful and understand me here. I'm not saying don't do anything. I'm saying look at the process and go, well, how can I remove friction from this? How can it be more respectful? It's about balance. And finally, is it appropriate? Is it really the time to solve that risk at this level? If the risk you're looking at is physical compromise of your office space, well, are you using a co-working space, or do you actually have a physical office? Are your team all working remotely from cafes? You need to solve your problems in a way that is appropriate to what you're doing right now. Your security doesn't need to scale at the early stage. It just needs to be there and happen. It will start scaling as you start to understand it more and as your company grows. People who simplify, overscale their security early often don't notice the bits that they don't need. So they'll feel very comforted they have a process, but they might miss some bits around the edges because they're not looking closely anymore, because it's too refined, it's too clean. Finally, with appropriate, do you have the people and time to maintain it? Now, security teams in early stage companies are small, particularly in places outside of places like Silicon Valley or these big startup hubs. It takes time to do security. One of the reasons people will often spend money on security is because it allows them to get access to skills they don't have themselves. So you're going to either need one or the other. I'm going to come back to that in a second when we talk about how you can support early stage customers with our last section. So early stage companies need your support, whether you're an investor, an advisor, a director, a founder, or even inside them. Here's some tips for how you can get involved and help them out. And I'm forming it around three common questions that I'm asked a lot. Firstly, do we need to certify against an international standard or compliance scheme? So examples here being PCI DSS, ISO 27000, any of these compliance schemes. And to make it simpler for you, you can thank me later, I've built you a diagram. Now, some of you have just reeled at the amount of color on the screen. Please, you can process this afterwards. The trick with compliance schemes is some or an awareness of them is going to be really critical and essential, such as an awareness of ISO 27000. Now, that means knowing about it is a good idea and alignment with it is encouraged. Now, why? Because when you do that due diligence, linking back to that first section where we're trying to speed up our sales process, your more mature customers are probably already aligned with or certified to these large global standards. And so when they do their due diligence, they ask you questions aligned with those standards. So by being aware of them and aligned with them, you're preempting that due diligence. You're preparing for the questions you will be asked later on. Some of the standards, like PCI DSS and HIPAA, so PCI DSS is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, which only applies if you hold credit card data or you process credit cards. And HIPAA, the Health Information Privacy Act of America, is all about health data. Now, if you're handling health data or credit card data, these two standards are not nice to have. They are mandatory for you and you have to get certified. That's kind of a cost of entry. So what you're able to do is look at the context and field you're in, the industry you're in, the data you're holding, the location you're operating, and you can pick which standards apply. But if I was going to give you a recommendation, I would, at least in the early stages, learn about ISO, the NIST frameworks for security. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology out of the US, and SOC 2, SOC 2 being an optional framework, but often asked for by service companies. Align with them over time, and then pick the ones that are mandatory for you and go for those first. Later on, you can go for these optional ones if it has a strategic benefit to you. So, for example, if ISO 27000 compliance is actually going to send a market signal that you are more mature or make your due diligence much, much quicker because you can show your certification, that would be a good investment. But don't do this until you know there's a need. Like anything else in an early stage company, validate the requirement before you continue. Oop. Second question. This sounds expensive. How much will it cost? Yes, absolutely. Cybersecurity is not known for being cheap. In fact, the average cybersecurity salary is $117,000 US. Now, when I say average, that includes juniors. That's including analysts. So for an experienced person, you're looking probably twice that. That's a lot of money, especially if you're an early stage company and you've only just raised your first capital. Even in a more established scale up company, if you needed a team of 4 or 5 people, that's $1 million gone before you've blinked. And that's without tooling. That's without investment in processes or additional outside consultancy. They say, and I say they, I mean Gartner, I mean the organizations out there that do annual reports, and there are many, whether from big four companies or from organizations like Gartner, that will look at how much organizations are spending on cybersecurity. The current estimate in 2019 is that it represents 15% of your overall IT and software spend. Now, I don't know how accurate this would be for a high growth company because, in all honesty, many high growth companies don't have a clear idea of what budget they have in IT and software because their priorities are not in that operational focus and more in the growth focus. But it gives you an idea of a benchmark. So if you wanted to see right now, am I spending enough? You could go and have a look at what are we spending on IT and software and see if you're spending the same amount as this on your cybersecurity. It could be you're spending more. It could be you're spending less. But it's a place to start. Now, overall, as an industry, cybersecurity is worth, or was worth in 2019, $40.8 billion. It's a huge industry. That's a huge industry that's trying very hard to get your dollars. It's just like you. They want to grow, they want to gain customers. So before you start buying, just think about this. People can do manual, non-scalable processes first. So hiring a really good person, even if it's just one, could be a better investment than sending less money on a tool if that tool is never going to be used properly, or isn't properly embedded in your processes, or isn't respecting what you do. How much you spend is subjective. It's going to depend on your specific context, the industry you operate in, and what's expected of you. But remember that spend doesn't need to be technology. It could be people, it can be process. It could be on planning for survival and educating before you get into implementation, because at least that way you're prepped for survival rather than coming in and buying tools and then hoping you'll survive if something bad happens. Now, on these things, if you're in a company that has no budget, and I don't judge, I've worked with companies that have literally $0 in their budget for cybersecurity. And sometimes that's from naivety, and sometimes that's just circumstance that they have other fires to fight right now. If you don't have money, then you have to spend time. And that's the reality of it. There's no, we won't do security in a high growth company. You just have to do it differently. And that means reading your books, following your blog articles, reading white papers, and implementing these things yourself. Now, that can be a lot of time in those early stages. So collaborate with other companies, work with other high growth companies and share approaches, because there is no need for each one of us to invest a full person's effort in writing everything from scratch if it can be shared amongst us. Now, if you need examples, if you want to talk further about that, reach out to the community in the VC space and talk to them, because there are literally thousands of companies who are doing the same thing over and over again. And I know there's at least one investor listening to this going, that sounds like a business opportunity. There's absolutely companies out there trying to do that too. So finally, as an investor, director, or advisor, what can I do to support this? Well, what can you do? What you can do if you've been watching this, there's 4 things. So it's quite straightforward. Demonstrate. Firstly, prove, show in your behavior and actions that cybersecurity matters, not in a way that is led by fear. I don't want you saying, hey, cybersecurity is going to destroy your business and you should be terrified. Your baby is ugly, you should feel bad. I want you to say, actually, cybersecurity can help us go fast. It's a sign of maturity and it's a way to focus. And I want you to demonstrate that in how you behave, the questions you ask. I want you to prioritize. When the conversations come up in board meetings or in strategies or in planning, I want you to see security as a benefit and help it gain priority in overall strategy, even if it doesn't add dollar figures initially. I want you to be empathetic. Security is really hard and thankless. Imagine trying to protect something and knowing that you had to protect, say, a building from every possible attack or thing that could go wrong, and an attacker only has to get it right once. That's a really, really unbalanced situation. So celebrate the improvements they make. Listen when challenges are hard. Congratulations for a team that has solved a big incident is important, goes a long way. And finally, connect. I want you to link your portfolio companies together. I want you to connect with other groups who are advisors, directors, investors, and collaborate, because the future of security in high growth, scalable organizations is not in independence and siloed focus. It is in collaboration across multiple organizations. And as the people who link these, you are bridges in our networks, you are bridges between these organizations, and you are uniquely prepared and positioned to connect them together and enable them to share. So that's your role in this. Notice I haven't asked you to give a lot of money. I haven't asked you to buy this tool. I'm asking you to show behavior, show empathy, show importance, and then do your bit to bring companies together. Now, I'm going to open the chat to any questions at this point. We've got a couple of minutes left. So I'll stop sharing on the screen, but if you do need to contact me afterwards, you can contact me at laura@safestep.io. You can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. You can find us online, but this is the sales pitch. But if you want to pass it on to your companies, that would be wonderful too. So I'm just going to have a little check here and see if we've got any questions in the chat. So any questions from the team here? This is a big subject. I'm really grateful. Thank you for registering, for attending this live, or for watching the video catch up. We'll be publishing more on this and other related topics over the coming months. So please watch this space, subscribe, come to our events. We'd love to see you there. And more importantly, connect with us with your stories. I'd love to talk to you about your portfolio companies and how they're doing security, not just as a product company founder, but as a security practitioner, somebody who's always learning and growing. So thank you for your time today, for your focus, and please reach out. We'd love to have a talk, and we'll see you soon.